Thank you for that very generous introduction. I need to explain something, though, that was brought up in the introduction. He said that I live on a farm with my high school sweetheart and wife. They are the same person. And she is here tonight. Her name's Rhonda. And did any of you catch Representative Dorothy Moon's presentation today? Well, she says that she's literally a gold digger, right? Because she has a gold mine. Well, I tell people I was very presumptuous. At a very young age, I married my high school sweetheart. I married my trophy wife first, assuming that I would accomplish something later in life that would warrant a trophy wife. So, in any case, it saves a lot of trouble later on in life if you just go ahead and get that over with. Rhonda and I, we grew up in Appalachia. And if you caught Matt Shea's presentation where he showed, what was it, Greater Appalachia, the region of the country that would presume to resist foreign or federal government the most. Well, we grew up, if that was Greater Appalachia, we grew up in downtown Appalachia, okay? We're in the center of that from eastern Kentucky. And I had some culture shock when I went to MIT, I have to tell you. 18 years in a town of 1,500 people that was the county seat. And then I get on a plane and I go to Massachusetts, the Soviet Socialist Republic of Massachusetts, and I get off the plane and I'm going through my first crosswalk. We had one stoplight in Vanceburg, but we didn't have any crosswalks. And I'm going through my first crosswalk and a car honked at me. And I thought, this is amazing. I've been here 2 hours and I've already run into somebody that knows me. So I waved at them. They were waving back with one finger, but from there, Rhonda also went to MIT. We were the first two hillbillies from our school to go to MIT. We did 3 things you're not supposed to do if you want to stay married. We went to school together, we started a company together, and we built a house together that's off the grid. After we did our high-tech company, we moved back to the farm that she grew up on. And that was our dream, to raise our children where we were raised in rural Kentucky. But what I found out was that government, even the local government, was encroaching on our lives there. And so I was spurred to write letters to the editor. This is the slippery banana peel. If any of you are thinking about writing a letter to the editor, it may lead to being a congressman someday, but that's what happened to me. I wrote a letter to the editor. They wanted to zone our county. We had a rural county, and they wanted to tell every farmer, every landowner there, you got to come to the county seat to ask permission if you want to do something with your property. And I thought that was a load of bull. And so I wrote a letter to the editor, and I alerted all of my neighbors to the fact that this was going to happen. And they showed up, and I went to speak. Mind you, I was not elected to be anything. I had just written a letter to the editor. And after 5 minutes, they told me to sit down and be quiet. And I stood there. I wasn't about to sit down. I mean, I was fighting for property rights in our county, and I had a stare down with the planning board commissioner. And she said, if I give everybody here more than 5 minutes, then we'll be here for days. So the first person to stand up in the crowd was a Democrat, and he said, he can have my 5 minutes. And she said, well, you may proceed. You've got another 5 minutes. But before I could start, 30 other people stood up, the whole crowd, and said, he can have our 5 minutes. So I ended up with like 155 minutes. But that told me that people wanted a leader, and that if you could earn their trust, that they wanted somebody to speak for them, whether you had a title or not. And after a few more letters to the editor, they convinced me to run for a position called County Judge Executive, which is like the mayor of the county, which is what I did. And when I got in there, I read every bill, every phone bill, every electric bill, every bill the county was getting, and found all sorts of mistakes and saved the county hundreds of thousands of dollars by going through bills that nobody had looked at for 20 years. And so that, I thought, there's 3,000 counties. And if I'm doing this in one county, and there's 3,000 of those in the United States, how much waste could there be in the federal government? And so our congressman, he decided to retire, and people encouraged me to run for Congress. So that's how I got there. But I had another kind of cultural shock when I got to Congress. This is my first week of voting. Actually, the second night that I was voting, I took my voting card and I cast a vote. I was one of the few no's. There's a big screen, 435 names on it in the House of Representatives. And there was a red no next to my name, sticking out like a sore thumb. So a staffer that works for the leadership came over and informed me of my mistake. I said, well, I meant to vote that way. And she said, well, if you want to know what's in the bill, you can come over to our table over here and we'll explain it to you. I said, I read the bill, that's why I'm voting no. And she said, well, you know what? We're not whipping the vote tonight, so you can vote how you want on this one. And that was a shock to me, to learn on my second night there, that's how this place works. You get their permission to vote how you want. And I decided that's not the way it was going to work for me after that. In fact, let me show you the voting card that we used to vote in Congress. Now, in the Senate, they call their names, but in the House, there's too many of them. So we have these voting cards. And it doesn't really belong to me. It belongs to 750,000 people in Kentucky. They've trusted me with it. But I keep it in my wallet with my credit cards and driver's license, and I had to pay for a meal the other day, and I thought it was my credit card, and I handed it to the waitress. And she took it, and she was swiping it, and it didn't work. She came back and told me the card was rejected. And I insisted on knowing why it was rejected, and she showed me the card, and she said, sir, it's already got $21 trillion on it. But that is the problem in Washington, D.C. My colleagues are using these like credit cards, and the bill is going to be paid by our children. We used to say grandchildren. It's going to the chickens are going to come home to roost before our grandchildren have to pay this. In fact, they're going to come home to roost for us. I'll get to that point in a little bit. And in fact, let me just tell you right now. I just looked this up. We spent this is for the fiscal year ending on September 30th, just a few days ago. We spent $500 billion on interest on the national debt. I serve on the Transportation Committee. We spent $50 billion on roads and bridges. That tells you we spent 10 times as much for interest on the debt as we did all of the federal contribution to roads and bridges in this country. So this is not a burden on our children. This is a burden on us now. And we are ignoring it, and we need to stop treating these cards like credit cards, and we need to take seriously our fiscal responsibility. I guess I can't go by tonight without mentioning the Supreme Court confirmation hearing. You all want me to comment on that, I'm sure. The last time, let me first start by saying the last time I saw a confirmation that was this contentious, it was Betsy DeVos at the Department of Education. The left was apoplectic. My phone lines were getting melted. Everybody from intern to chief of staff was answering phones. People were calling me up, telling me not to vote for Betsy DeVos. There's only one problem with that. The Senate has advice and consent, not the House of Representatives. So my staff and I, we would explain to them that I had no vote in this matter and that they should call Senator Rand Paul or Senator Mitch McConnell. And they would, many of them insisted that that was a cop-out, that I could do something to stop Betsy DeVos. They knew I was in D.C. I could do something. And I thought, there is something I could do. So I sat down and I wrote a one-sentence bill that says the Department of Education shall terminate on December 31st, 2018. It's H.R. 899. I've got about a dozen co-sponsors now, but I dropped it in the hopper while they were voting on Betsy DeVos. So as the phone lines were still melting down, as people called up, my staff changed the message. They said, well, you do know he's trying to stop her. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he's introduced a bill to get rid of her job, to eliminate the Department of Education. And the left didn't know what to make of that. So I instructed my staff to ask them, well, surely you don't want President Trump to decide what or how your children learn. Because I saw an opportunity here to turn this around on the left. And By the way, this precipitated an uncomfortable moment at the White House once when I met Betsy DeVos. I had to, before she brought it up, I brought it up. I said, you know, I'm the one who introduced the bill to try and get rid of your department. She said she was okay with that. I'm not sure if she was, but let me say something else about the hearings. First of all, there's a lot of tribalism. There's red team versus blue team, and it's made some unlikely heroes of some very mediocre colleagues of mine. And don't get caught up in this, I would say. And I'm not going to name names, but you've seen them in the news, and now they're celebrities. But they all voted for the omnibus last week, okay? So they are not fiscal heroes, I can guarantee you that. And they also voted for another bill that I'm going to tell you about that you don't even know about yet. It's not even been in the news. I expect it might be in the next issue of New American, but which is the real news. So here's what happened while you were distracted. And by the way, this would have passed on a voice vote. This tells you the power of one person out of 435. But they expanded the Patriot Act in the House of Representatives. A bill passed that nobody was watching, except my colleague Justin Amash and I caught this, and our staff caught it, that will allow nonprofits and banks to share your financial information with the federal government and police without a warrant at no minimum threshold, down to a 1 penny transaction could be disclosed with the government without a warrant. And they titled the bill, End Sex Trafficking. Because if the nexus for allowing them to share your information is that they might be trying to stop sex trafficking or money laundering. But this bill, because there's no warrant involved, there's no judicial check on it, no judge has to approve whether this was a valid disclosure of your private information, a violation of your Fourth Amendment, if you will. How will you know what the reason was to share it? It's probably just going to get automatically shared. But they suspended the rules to pass this. What does that mean? Well, in the House of Representatives, they can basically break every rule that we have as long as they can get a 2/3 majority. So we called a vote on it. And it was my friend Justin Amash. If you go back and watch C-SPAN, you will hear this bill passed on a voice vote. And before the gavel went down, he demanded a recorded vote. And I've done that myself. I call it the 500-yard dash. It's 500 yards from my office to that microphone where you demand the recorded vote. And I can take some 10 minutes to pass a bill by voice. I can cover that distance in 5 minutes or less. And so he requested the recorded vote. We did not stop the bill. We needed 33.3% of the House to vote no. We got 29.5%. But we got close, and now people are paying attention, and now people are on record for voting for this. And that's what it takes. One person can bring transparency. That's what I've done with the Swamp series. And they hate you for breathing air up there, just for breathing air next to them. You can feel the hate because you have exposed what's going on and how they are passing bills, unconstitutional bills, without your knowledge. So it was meant to be encouraging that one person can blow the whistle, but I better throw in a few more jokes or you're going to be depressed. The other thing that passed while you were watching the Kavanaugh hearings is another omnibus. The president said he wouldn't sign another one of these. He's already signed it while you were watching the Kavanaugh hearings. It increases spending. Planned Parenthood gets just as much funding this year as it did last year, and there's no money for the wall. So these are the things that happened while you were watching the Kavanaugh hearings, and I'm not even sure that the press is going to go back and unwind this. Spending was increased across the board. We just funded the 18th year of the war in Afghanistan. Think about that, 18 years. Our country has never been at war in a conflict for 18 years. It's twice as long as Vietnam. My son next week is going to ship off to basic training. There are kids like him who were born after the war started who are going to deploy into the war. That should send chills up your spine. that you could, this generation, my colleagues have complained that we need more military funding, that we've got granddaughters flying in the same airframe that their grandfathers flew. Not just the same type plane, but the exact same plane. I say that's a shame, but the real problem is it's the same war. And that is happening. So anyways, we've been trying to get a vote on this. Congress has abdicated its constitutional responsibility to decide when and whether we're at war. And we're getting... And so we're getting bogged down in more and more of these. In Afghanistan, we're also rebuilding what we bomb, okay? Did you know there's a hydroelectric plant there that you helped to build? Do you know why the Taliban's not trying to blow it up? Because they get 30% of all the electricity that your hydroelectric dam produces. It's the deal that's been brokered. You're paying the light bill for the Taliban. Those are the kind of encumbrances that we've got into over there. We've also spent, and I've talked to the Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, John Sopko. If there's one man hated in Washington more than me, it might be John Sopko. He's the one who exposed that we paid like $7 million for 9 goats to try and stimulate the cashmere industry in Afghanistan. He can't find the goats. We think they've been eaten. That was some expensive goat. But he's exposed things like this. I said, how much have we spent trying to eradicate poppy, which becomes heroin? Opium is the intermediate drug. He said $8 billion so far. $8 billion just on trying to eradicate poppy. And now there's twice as much of it being grown as there was before we started spending $8 billion. I introduced an amendment in Congress to eliminate that source of funding. I mean, we couldn't do any worse, can we? If we spent $8 billion and they doubled production, maybe if we don't spend money, it'll be cut in half again. Because ironically, some of the irrigation and the roads and the things that we're doing are enabling this. But that vote only got 70 votes in the House of Representatives. I asked John Sopko in my office, I said, so are we really trying to eradicate this? He says, well, we go down and knock it down mechanically. We do all these things. I said, we got this stuff in Kentucky the farmers use called Roundup. I said, would it work on poppy fields? He said, oh, absolutely. It will respond to herbicide just like any other plant that does photosynthesis. And I said, well, why don't we use it? He said, it'd be far too effective. You would achieve the goal. And then you would have all these other problems. That the Taliban would get ticked off. By the way, that's a source of funding for them now that we've enabled. But in any case, just another reason that 18 years is too long and we need to get out of Afghanistan. I really enjoyed Representative Moon's presentation on constitutional conventions and stopping those. Those battles are being fought at the state level. It's a shame that we have federal politicians who are advocating for a constitutional convention, as if your battle isn't hard enough there. But thank you for doing that. I tell people the best reason against a constitutional convention is my colleagues don't follow the Constitution we have now. What makes you think they're going to follow a new one? Also, on my way here, and I texted one of my colleagues about this, who's a constitutionalist. I said, when was the last time an amendment to the Constitution shrunk the size of the federal government? Not counting the repeal of one of the amendments, prohibition, not counting the repeal of prohibition, when was the last time? I said, wasn't it the Bill of Rights? Wasn't it the 10th? He said, actually, it was the 11th. The 11th Amendment, which limited the jurisdiction of federal courts. People in one state can't sue another state in a federal court, for instance. So the 11th Amendment, that was like peak liberty in the Constitution, and it's gone down since then. There hasn't been an amendment that stopped the growth of the size and scope of the federal government since then, and I don't expect that there will be an amendment that does when you go to try an amendment. Let me give you an example of one of the frauds that's been perpetrated on the American public as an amendment to the Constitution. The Balanced Budget Amendment. Okay, this polls at 85, 90%. So I am putting myself in political peril here to tell you that the one that they brought in front of the House of Representatives this year in March, 4 legislative days after they passed the omnibus, right, after they blew the budget, they bring forward this balanced budget amendment. It had 2 major flaws. Number 1 says does not apply if we're at war. Okay. Well, it wouldn't have applied for the last 18 years with respect to Afghanistan. Okay. But even if we weren't involved in a conflict, the first vote we take every 2 years in Congress is who's going to be Speaker. I will tell you the second vote we will take if they pass this balance of budget amendment is to declare war on, lower upper central Mesopotamia or something. Like, there will be a war declared so that they can just get out of the balanced budget amendment. If that's not bad enough, so let's say, okay, let's take that loophole out. Let's use the rest of the balanced budget amendment they proposed. I went on the floor of the House and pointed this out to them. They did not like this. They didn't give me time during the debate. I had to go to the floor during that period of time when people go to congratulate their football teams, which is, I don't often do that. I'm usually there calling them out on a bill that they won't allow me to have time to debate on. But here's the other problem with the balanced budget amendment. There could be a time at which a supermajority of Congress decides there's something so pressing that we have to violate the balanced budget amendment. So there's a 60% clause in the balanced budget amendment. If 60% of the House and 60% of the Senate decide to violate a balanced budget, then it's okay. You can do that. Well, guess what? 61% had voted for the omnibus back in March. And this latest omnibus, 95% of Democrats voted for it and 75% of Republicans. So this is the balanced budget amendment. It's only as good as the people who are there to enforce it or who write it. And they are not good enough. I'm sorry to tell you, we have a balanced budget amendment. It's called the debt limit. When you hit the debt limit, the government doesn't have to shut down. You just have to balance the budget that day. You can't spend any more than comes in that day. But they act like it's the end of the world if we don't raise the debt limit. All it does is impose instantly a balanced budget. And so we've already got that, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But one of the things, there's like cotton candy. I call these cotton candy political solutions. They taste good, they're not going to nourish you, and they may rot your teeth, okay? That's the Constitutional Convention, is one of those cotton candy things. The balanced budget is a cotton candy thing. I support term limits, but it's not going to solve the problem. Do you know I've been in Congress almost 6 years? On January 3rd, 2019, just a couple months from now, if I should win my reelection and I get sworn in, I'll be number 190-something out of 435. Like, I will be more senior after 6 years and 6 weeks than over half of Congress. So over half of Congress will have been elected in the last 6 years. Most of these term limit bills are like 12 years or 6 years or something like that. If half of Congress has turned over in the last 6 years, where are all the good guys? If that was the solution, if turnover was the solution, where are they? I don't see them, okay? So another one of those cotton candy type solutions that it tastes good, it doesn't fill you up, and it's going to rot your teeth is trying to get rid of the 60-vote rule in the Senate. Okay, now, I know you've been conditioned by your congressman to think that that is the reason they can't get anything done. The reason the House of Representatives can't get anything done is the Senate won't do it. Well, we came up with a way where you could repeal Obamacare with 50 votes, and it didn't happen. You think anything else is going to happen if you lower the threshold from 60 to 50? And by the way, I know some of you are thinking, I've heard this objection, like some of the other objections to the con stuff. I've heard this objection. Well, this is not what the founding fathers intended, to have a 60-vote threshold to get a supermajority to get anything passed in the Senate. Well, the founders never intended for senators to be elected by the people either, right? I look at government as a very dangerous thing, just like our founders did. It's like fire or explosive material, and they put it under lock and key, and the lock is designed as several concurrent locks that you have to pick in order to unleash government. And what they did is they took one of the locks out when they made the Senate subject to popular election instead of working for the states. I call it the 10th Amendment Repeal Act, the 17th Amendment, because when the senators quit working for the states, it made it easier to get stuff passed, but it also, the senators were less likely to represent the states. So in any case, this 60 vote rule, I ask conservatives, why would you ever want to make it easier, if you're a conservative, to spend money or pass a law in the Senate? There is no reason you should want it, because that's the two things they do: pass laws and spend money. And if you make it easier, you are going to get more laws and more money spent. And people say, and I say, why don't we have like a 70 vote threshold? Can you imagine all of the bad legislation that would not have passed? Okay? And some people say, oh, I get it. You're worried that the Democrats will get 50 senators or 51 senators, and that'll be the problem. And so you're looking forward. No, I'm worried about the 50 that you've got in the Senate right now. Okay, did you watch some of these hearings? They're incoherent ramblings. Do you see how easy they vote for spending? I would not want to lower the threshold for the 100 senators who are there now in order to grow government or spend money. So. I'm gonna tell you something tonight that may surprise you. I am not a member of the Freedom Caucus. Why not? So I will explain why not. The proposition was presented to me that we need 40 individuals who will come to the floor, lock arms, and vote in solidarity against the Republican leadership on when the Constitution is at risk, when there's clearly something that we need to do. We need to have 40 solid votes who will not cave. I said, whoa, actually you only need 39. I'll already be down here. My vote will already be registered while you're having your meeting, and then you can come down and join me. Like, I don't need to be part of a voting block. It's a vote, it's okay, it's a strategy, it's game theory, but if you had 40 individuals who are willing to do the right thing regardless of the outcome, they wouldn't have to lock arms. They're my best friends, don't get me wrong. I need them. And I hope you send us more. Whatever state you're from, send us some more of those guys or gals. But sometimes after the end of a long meeting, they resolve to not to fight. Let me give you an example of a fight that I fought, and it was a lonely fight. The Republicans promised you that they would repeal Obamacare root and branch. If I heard it once, I heard it 100 times. Root and branch. Well, you gave us the majority in the House and the Senate, and the bill became prune and replant, not root and branch. In fact, our bill, the Republican bill, would have taken all the mandates, penalties, subsidies, and bailouts in Obamacare and replaced them with Republican mandates, penalties, subsidies, and bailouts. The one thing the bill didn't do that it needs to do, it did not legalize affordable insurance. It was still going to be illegal to sell healthy people cheaper insurance than you sell to unhealthy people. And that is the biggest aspect of socialism in Obamacare. Not the taxes they collect and send out. The biggest tax in Obamacare is the fact it doesn't matter how healthy you are basically going to subsidize somebody else's health care through the mandates on the healthcare companies, and none of that went away. So I got whipped by our governor. I got whipped by Mike Pence multiple times, had to go to the vice president's office, got whipped on this. People were really trying to wear me down. I got a call from Mr. Trump. He reminded me he's really popular in Kentucky. That was the first thing. He said, maybe it's because I ran against crooked Hillary. They don't like her down there either. I said, no, Mr. President, I'm gonna speak for the people of Kentucky. They genuinely like you, and they like me too, so neither of us got to worry about the re-election down here, okay? Because essentially that's what he was saying, that Air Force One would be at CVG next week if I didn't vote for this. But ultimately, I did not vote for it. And that was a hard, hard vote to take because the Freedom Caucus voted for it. And there was a lot of pressure, but that is one of the best votes that I've ever taken. The fact that that bill and that instantiation did not pass the Senate, frankly, probably saved the Republicans bacon, because every bad thing about Obamacare we would own at this point without making it possible for you to buy affordable health insurance. So that's an example of standing up when it is very difficult. When your friends are not with you, that's a difficult time. I see Representative Moon shaking her head. She's been there. So let me tell you about a caucus I am in. In fact, I'm the chairman of it. It's the Second Amendment Caucus. Now, let me tell you how I became, yes, we like our God and guns in Kentucky. We cling to the Bible and our guns. Here's how I became the chairman. Well, the caucus had lapsed, and I was the first one to realize it. So I refiled the paperwork for the caucus and elected myself chairman before I opened membership. Everybody, and so now what I do, instead of getting around in a bunch of congressmen trying to show each other how smart they are in a room, I bring in guest speakers. I brought in Alan Gura, who won the Heller decision and the McDonald's decision in front of the Supreme Court. I brought in Dick Heller himself. And I have those people speak to congressmen and educate them on the Second Amendment. So everybody wants to know who's in the Second Amendment caucus. Well, I didn't want to start a caucus that squishy people could join to burnish their credentials, right? That they could say, oh, I'm for guns, I'm in the Second Amendment caucus. I'm for the Constitution. So I have the only caucus without a registry. Anyways, if you're a gun owner, you appreciate that. No, there's no way to know if somebody's in the Second Amendment caucus or not. I don't keep a list, so nobody can subpoena it. So in any case, let me tell you some of the legislation I've introduced as the chairman of the Second Amendment Caucus. One is to repeal the Gun-Free School Zone Act. This is an unconstitutional bill. 98% of mass shootings happen in a gun-free zone. Why would you want to put that label on your kids? I do not know why you would want to do that. That act needs repealed. The second bill that I've introduced is called the Safer Voter Act. I'm trying to tweak the liberals here a little bit with the title. So after the shooting happened in Florida, there was a lot of discussion, and in fact, the state of Florida did this, about raising the age to buy a gun from 18 to 21, the legal age. If you're old enough to vote, if you're old enough to die for your country, if you're a single mom at home with kids, shouldn't you be allowed to defend yourself? So I thought that was an anathema to our Second Amendment and to the rights of people all over this country. So I said, you know what? There's a federal prohibition on buying a handgun from an FFL unless you're 21 years old. So I introduced a bill to lower the federal age to buy a handgun from an FFL from 21 to 18. And instead of tying it to the draft age, I tied it to the voting age, because if it were up to the liberals, they would have 12-year-olds voting. And I called it the Safer Voter Act, Second Amendment for every registrable voter. So the other bill I introduced, if you remember, we had a shooting at a ballpark in Virginia. Congressmen were targeted. And those congressmen were technically in Virginia where they could have been carrying a gun, but they had just come from D.C. where you can't. And so there were some congressmen who said, we got to change this. You should be allowed to carry a gun if you're a congressman. I said, that doesn't smell right to me. That reeks of something like the British king might have done, right? If you're a member of the crown, or if you work for the crown, you can carry a gun, but if you don't, you can't. So I introduced a bill that says anybody can carry in D.C. If you can carry in your home state, you can carry in D.C. So that is reciprocity for everybody, not just congressmen. That's one of the bills I introduced. One of the times that I got in the crosshairs. I tell people, I'm so pro-gun, I've had the NRA doing robocalls against me in my district. And let me explain that. A lot of people want national reciprocity. It's constitutionally complicated, okay, to tell one state they have to follow the laws of another state. I know it's very popular. This one polls at like 99% national reciprocity. But when they brought it to the floor right before Christmas last year, they inserted gun control in it, gun control light. I like Representative Matt Shea said, the one thing that'll get you kicked out of my office is talking about common sense gun control, right? That's an oxymoron. Well, I have had whistleblowers from the Veterans Administration, they work there, call me and tell me we are taking away veterans' rights to own guns if they just so much as say on to an interviewer that they don't manage their own finances. They get adjudicated not by a court, but by a bureaucracy. And then they can't even have ammunition in the house. And then their wife can't even have a gun in the house. And this is going on today. And so what they had introduced into this reciprocity bill was strengthening that. They called it Fix NICS, the NICS background check. Oh, we're going to pressure all the branches of the federal government to submit more names into there, even names that haven't been adjudicated by a court. The impetus for this was the shooting in Texas where somebody had been court-martialed and then the information hadn't transferred. But that was a court. That was a court of law. Okay, I'm all right if you want the court of law to report these names. If somebody's been adjudicated, but that's not what this bill did, and they stuck it in this national reciprocity bill. So I made a video in my office, not very well produced, but I made a video, and it got like 750,000 views, blowing the whistle on this. What did I get in return? I got robocalls from the NRA in my district telling people I was anti-gun. So I just doubled down. I made another video. And I predicted what would happen. This bill would pass. Everybody would have their hands dirty. They would have already voted for the Fix NICS common sense gun control bill because it was inside of this popular bill, and that later, after the next tragedy, they would bring this bill up on its own. Well, I was only wrong in one aspect. They put it in the next omnibus, and they passed it. And so then I made a video telling people, look, I predicted this, and this happened. So sometimes doing the right thing, what is it? Every no good deed goes unpunished. I got punished for that one. I've got probably about 3 minutes here left and 10 minutes of stuff, so let me go very quickly. About this scorecard. The New American has the best scorecard by far. And let me tell you one of the reasons why. Most of the other organizations tell us congressmen when they're going to score a vote. Before the bill comes to the floor, they send out an email alert to the entire Hill staff. This vote is being scored. How many of you could get 100 on a test if you were told what the answer was? Okay, I thought so. So I have actually banned my staff from telling me which votes are being scored by those organizations. Because when I go to vote, I know it influences my decision. I may be thinking, I should probably vote yes on this bill, and then I find out it's being scored, and I don't want my score to go down, and it's hard to not to know that. It's hard to forget that this is being scored, and it influences your decision. So I have told my staff on the scorecards that tell you the answer before the test, don't tell me, okay? But the New American, they don't tell you. And that is why there's so many people with lousy scores. It's a lot harder to do the constitutional thing every single time, knowing that any of those votes could be scored. So, I don't know, my Club for Growth, Heritage Action, Freedom Works scores average maybe about 85. I say that's not bad. They're only wrong 15% of the time. And you guys are doing even better. You're only wrong 1% of the time. Anyways, I just want to let you know that that's why this scorecard is very meaningful. I know from other congressmen, their constituents take the New American, bookmark the page, open it up, dog-ear it, bring it to the town hall, and ask their congressman, why does their score suck? I know congressmen have been called out on that. Very quickly, country of origin labeling. In some of the in your roundtable or panel discussion, you talked about the trade agreements. I have a real problem with the World Trade Organization, particularly now that I'm in Congress. We were told about 2 or 3 years ago that we had to pass a bill because the World Trade Organization said so. We had to remove country of origin labeling from beef and pork. Why? Because the World Trade Organization said so. We had been sued and lost. In what kind of government? The World Trade Organization. And that doesn't sit well with me. Look, your shoes tell you what, they're labeled, your suit is labeled, your car is labeled, your tools are labeled, your cell phone is labeled, but your beef and pork does not have to be labeled now because the World Trade Organization said so. They said jump, and Congress said, how high do we have to jump? And that's what happened, and now all of those labels have been repealed on beef and pork. That's my problem with the World Trade Organization and multilateral agreements. I can't let this go. I know I'm probably out of time, but just a couple more minutes here. I can't let this go now that I'm in Wisconsin. I never pass up an opportunity to tick somebody off. I have a bill that would legalize interstate transport of raw milk. Okay. The states make these rules, but the FDA came in without an act of Congress and said, we're going to declare raw milk to be adulterated milk. And since we have the power to regulate adulterated milk, we're going to ban its interstate transport. And they have raided dairy farms. They've raided Amish farmers. They've poured out their milk. They've locked up their milk coolers. They've carted these people off to jail. They show up in SWAT teams. It's ridiculous. So my bill just says if it's legal in state A and legal in state B, we're not going to arrest you for going from state A to state B. Sounds pretty common sense. I got 23 co-sponsors, and I was careful to get them before I introduced the bill because I knew there'd be hell to pay from the milk lobby. The milk lobby is against this bill. Okay, they like the fact that the farmers are selling a commodity to them, and no one farmer's milk it's on pounds of butterfat. No one farmer's milk is better than the others within certain ranges, and so they don't like this bill. They don't want farmers to have an opportunity to go outside of their distribution channels. So what did they do? The lobbyists came after me, the milk lobbyists. They said people would die, kids were going to die, the blood would be on my hands. My wife's Google alerts were going off, all of these articles coming out in all these agricultural magazines about how bad I was, what an evil person I was. And she texted me. She said, OMG, I did not realize the lactose lobby was this intolerant. I want to leave on this last story here. So I'm wearing a tux, and my wife is wearing an evening gown. The last time we were supposed to do this was at the White House. Okay. No, I didn't get disinvited. I know what you're thinking. My daughter, she goes to a public school, and she's 14, and all the kids have been asking her, have you ever met the president? Have you met Trump yet? They don't care her dad's a congressman. Nobody cares about the legislative branch. They want to know, have you ever met Trump? And when she tells them no, then they think I'm a nobody, right? So obviously we had to get my daughter in front of Trump. So at the White House Christmas party, they invite all the congressmen over and their spouse. You were allowed to bring one guest. My wife and I agreed that my daughter could be my date so that she could meet President Trump. And trust me, my wife has suffered through 5 years of Obama in the White House and skipped a lot of Christmas parties. She was looking forward to this one. So she didn't get to wear that dress at Christmas, but my daughter did. She's 14, and she practiced shaking my hand for 3 days. She's an overachiever. She did not want to screw this up. Right? How many chances are you going to get to shake the president's hand? And if you've never shaken a man's hand, you better darn well do some practice. So we practiced. She'd come up to me, tap me on the shoulder, turn around, okay, shake your hand. So she got pretty proficient at shaking my hand. And we go up to the president. Now, I forgot, he doesn't like to shake everybody's hand. That's why he gives you the thumbs up, right? but she grabs his hand before he can give her the thumbs up, grips it, puts a death grip on him, and looks him in the eye. Before she lets go of his hand, she says, "Mr. President, could you make school lunches great again?" And this summer, they did relax the sodium requirements and the whole grain requirements. And so, you might say I'm not getting anything done, but by golly, my daughter did in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.